Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. Hello. My name is Jo Grady. I'm the General Secretary of UCU, and welcome to our online event, which is the launch of Exposed, our campaign to uncover and expose the interference of this government in the education sector and the monitoring and targeting of our members. I am really delighted tonight to be joined by some guests. One of them hasn't quite joined us yet, so I'll introduce him when he turns up. But first and foremost, I would like to introduce you to UCU member and Professor of Postcolonial Studies, Priya Gopal. Hi, Priya. And also to the General Secretary at the National Education Union, Daniel Kebede. Hello, Daniel. And thank you for joining us this evening. For those of you who are regulars to UCU Lives, you know the drill by now. For those of you who are new, hello, we are happy to have you. Leave in the comments on whichever platform you're joining, your name, where you are, how long you've been a UCU member. If you're not a UCU member, let us know what union you are a member of. The events of the last fortnight have been extremely concerning, and that's one of the reasons that we're here this evening, is why we have decided to launch a national campaign. And this is going to be a campaign that we are going to need to see in every single workplace.
How are we doing? Don't worry, you're all right. You can come. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Daniel, you're not on mute. As I was saying, this is a campaign that we need to take into every single workplace in our union. Exposed is not just a social media campaign. We are going to need to build it in every single workplace. And specifically, as our union has done before, we are going to need to build it politically. And we're going to be using our sister unions and making sure that we work with them too. The UCU has responded to these attacks at a pace during the last 2 weeks. We've already written to the Secretary of State twice, and we have agreed as a minimum a number of actions that we need our branches and members to be doing in forthcoming weeks. These include, but are not going to be limited to, engaging all political parties, encouraging all members who believe that they have been targeted to submit a subject access request. And we're going to be guiding you through that. We don't want people going it alone. We're going to be running tailored sessions for reps under the Exposed campaign banner. Again, this is not going to be limited, but this will involve how to deal with instances of employer intimidation in your branch. Sessions on data gathering. We want all of our branches to be engaging in data gathering so we can map and better understand what this government are doing. That will mean we'll be able to respond and support branches and members. And we're also looking at how we can particularly support our migrant members, because we know they come under more intimidation and different types of attacks. We are updating our guidance and our advice based on all of this. And I'm not going to be able to say much about this evening, but when I do have updates, we are in talks with legal counsel right now about legal options that are available to us. There's going to be petitions, letter writings, and much more. And the truth is, the much more is the important bit, because these attacks are deeper than ever. And our fight back is going to have to be as well. So let's get cracking. And the guest we were waiting for, Owen, so let you in thanks for joining us in what looks like you've squeezed us in. So people will know Owen Jones, author and activist. And I'm going to come to you straight away, Owen, because there's a few questions I want to put to you. First of all, I think it would be really good for our members to get your overall take on developments in HE in particular in recent weeks, the government interference in research groups, independent bodies, the compiling of dossiers on our members and the monitoring of their online activities. Over to you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's a big honour, as always, to back you and UCU as the son of a UCU shop steward. So it's the least I can do. You're right. I'm just outside Sky News, so I'm about to argue with Liam Fox about the horrors currently being unleashed with the support of the British government. And it's so important we talk about this. I wrote last week a column in which I spoke about the cases of which you're talking about today, which has to be put in a much, obviously in a broader context. We've had a moral panic over the last few years about so-called cancel culture and an onslaught against free speech, which has largely been around the claims of minorities for equality and justice, and the claims that essentially being critiqued even on social media by often otherwise voiceless members of minorities which face systemic oppression, that's cancel culture and that's an attack on free speech. And the hypocrisy of a government and the cabinet minister, obviously you're talking about, doing these big speeches, these lectures on academic free speech, whilst clearly trying to silence, harass and intimidate those who have spoken out against one of the great crimes of our time. And it just shows, I think, the not just the hypocrisy, but the deceit which has always underpinned this claim that the government is trying to safeguard academic free speech when they're seeking to intimidate academics who are correctly using.
Oh no, we lost Owen just as I think he was getting going. The point I think he was making is one that I very much agree with, and I pointed out to Michelle Donnellan in the letter that I wrote to her this week, actually. Oh, you're back. There you go.
Sorry,
you got just as you're in full flow.
sorry about that. So Matthew Goodwin, take for example Matthew Goodwin, and Matthew Goodwin is a so-called academic who has a big influence over the government, and his agenda is clear, which is that he thinks that the left are overrepresented in academia. What the government are clearly trying to do is wage a vendetta, an ideologically driven vendetta against academics who they believe represent a threat in civil society to their various political projects, and that's what partly this is driven by. What we're seeing at the moment is the world turned upside down its head. The idea that the real extremists are those who critique not just the current onslaught, the massacre taking place now, but the context, which is decades of occupation and apartheid. So that the fact that the government singled out someone for critiquing apartheid has been clearly described by Amnesty International, by Human Rights Watch, and the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, amongst others. It's clearly a legitimate position within academia to talk about apartheid, given the very human rights organizations which specialize in this area are talking about apartheid. So this just underscores there is no attempt to defend academic free speech. There is a ideologically waged political vendetta to silence those who the government regard as political threats, and any claim they had to defend academic free speech has gone up in flames.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more, really. It was actually interesting this week when we were writing a response letter to Michelle Donnellan, me and some of the staff at UCU, we went through notes that we keep from meetings that we have with them. And as you say, Michelle Donnellan, lecturing me back in 2020 about the threat to academic freedom posed by academics. I'm going to ask you one more question, because I know you potentially said it looks like you do have to go. Thank you for fitting us in. The other question I've got for you is, in the coming days and weeks and months, the campaign that we are going to be launching is going to be via the media. We're going to be making political interventions. We're going to be doing all sorts of stuff. And, obviously yourself, considerable profile, you make regular appearances across a variety of platforms. What would you say is, how do we get our message out? How do we make people care about something that might seem a bit of a fringe issue? We know it's not, but some people might think that.
I wonder if this is the beginning of a new campaign here, because the right should never have been able to steal the garbs of free speech and all the rest of it. The way they tried to redefine it was the right of powerful people to say often bigoted, prejudiced, worse, more extreme things than that about minorities that are marginalized without any right of anyone to respond to what they said. That even the very act of characterizing their speech as inflaming prejudice against often defenseless or relatively voiceless minorities, that's an attack on free speech, even though we hear that people who claim they're cancelled who do so from their newspaper columns, from television screens, and from their book deals, that the whole thing is ludicrous. I think we should start a new campaign for actual free speech. I think it's born out of what we're seeing at the moment, which is, throughout history, it's always been progressives who defended actual, genuine free speech and the right of free academic inquiry, which is what the government doesn't want. And I just wonder if it's now the beginning of given they have tried to turn this on us, that we build a broad-based campaign where we actually use this as a case study of how the government has tried to shut down free speech. And the reason I say that is, they claim this idea of cancel culture, which they've claimed is intimidating, often powerful people who keep their powerful positions, is some new phenomenon. The left, those deemed progressive, have always been on the receiving end. You had the first Red Scare back after World War I, in which you had deportations, arrests, academics being intimidated, and you had, of course, McCarthyism, which was known as the second Red Scare at the time. There's a long tradition of this, and it's so important that we stand our ground, we build these broad coalitions, and we make it clear that we are, the true, we hold the flame of genuine free speech and free academic inquiry, the ability of academics to freely explore often areas deemed controversial by the establishment, and that's what they want to shut down. I just think a new campaign could be born.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to take that as a full endorsement that you'll be back on these events and that you'll be backing all the way. Then
I'll do it, but probably at home. I'll juggle things better next time. But yeah,
at home with the cats will be great. Or,
exactly, the cats will feature. Yeah, obviously.
Well, thank you very much. And I think I think what you've said is exactly what we are starting here at UCU. We're engaging our members over this issue first, because this is just as much of an issue in further education colleges with Prevent, as it is in HE. So thank you very much for that, Owen.
No
and feel free.
Good luck. Solidarity as always to you and everyone at UCU.
Bye. Take care of yourself.
Okay,
Priya, I wanted to come to you next, if I can. Owen just spoke quite a bit there about people being caught in the crosshairs. I know that you know quite a bit about that yourself. That hasn't stopped you being extremely vocal online about this issue. I want to say thank you for that. I think it's exactly what our members should be doing in terms of amplifying our opposition to these attacks. That doesn't come without consequences often. And I just wanted to know if you could share with us what your initial reaction as some of these things started to emerge was, and kind of talk us through, your perspective on this. Priya's muted. Priya, you're muted.
Sorry, rookie mistake. Thanks, Joe. I think it's great that this campaign is kicking off. It's timely, it's necessary, and I don't think we have any choice but to fight back as hard as possible. When I first heard about some of these things, it was pretty much Groundhog Day for me. 2 years ago, I was supposed to give a talk to the Black and Minority Ethnic Staff Network at the Home Office. And they specifically wanted to discuss the context in which Windrush could be situated, the context of colonialism, race, migration, and so on. And they asked me specifically to address that for Black History Month. So this was October 2021. I got an email a day before the event saying something very urgent had come up and the event had to be postponed, and would I do this later? And initially I thought there was something wrong. I was told by friends not to be paranoid. 24 hours later, Guido Fawkes, which is a right-wing website, published a triumphant article saying that they had successfully lobbied for me to be cancelled, to be disinvited from this event because of comments I had made about the then Home Secretary, Priti Patel, online. I think the context in which this disinvitation apparently happened, I mean, I've never been given any explanation, so some of this is just stuff that people have subsequently put together, is that there are specific instructions to diversity networks under the Civil Services Diversity and Inclusion Strategy to not invite people who have commented adversely on any aspects of government policy. Now, there's a slight distinction here between what the guideline says and what Guido Fawkes claims, which is that I had been disinvited because I had spoken about Priti Patel's own racism towards refugees, migrants, and other sectors as being rooted in part in Asian anti-Blackness, which historically emerged in the context of empire in East Africa. And in a move that has now become very, very classic, which is to talk about people who raise issues of racism as being themselves the real racists, it was argued that, or Guido Fawkes argued, that my comments about Priti Patel were racist, and therefore I had to be disinvited under EDI guidelines, which don't allow somebody who is discriminatory to come and speak to civil servants. So it's a little bit of a mess in there between saying that people who comment adversely on government policy shouldn't be invited and people who are discriminatory shouldn't be invited. I understand that guideline has now been withdrawn. I'm not the only one, as you know, Joe. Others have been disinvited, both academics and non-academics. Dan Cazzetta, a weapons expert, was disinvited, although he got an apology because he got lawyers. And Ruth Swales, who is a DFE invitee, was also cancelled. And in all of these cases, it's not entirely clear why, other than social media posts. So my response to what we've been hearing in the last few days is complete lack of surprise, because I think this has been ongoing for some time and the scale is emerging only now.
Thanks. And thanks for sharing, what you went through with everyone, because I think some people watching will know it, and for some people it will be, complete news. I guess the thing that was interesting and I think quite alarming for us in the last fortnight is, they're not even subcontracting this work to Guido Fawkes anymore. The minister's just making these interventions herself. I will come back to you, Priya, but I just wanted to, Daniel, thank you for joining us as well. And first of all, this is your first session with UCU since you were elected. So you might be over this now, but congratulations on your election as GS of the National Education Union. On the issue of targeting education workers, everybody will have seen the recent COVID inquiry exposed WhatsApp messages from senior members of the government, which clearly revealed that their COVID strategy, or lack of COVID strategy, was almost entirely based on direct opposition to the work of unions, not least of all and probably primarily your union. So, I guess Priya was just saying this feels like it's not a surprise. It feels like a coordinated attack on education workers. And that was an attack. And I feel like this is, it's our status in the communities that we serve, the respect in the communities we serve, maybe our views more broadly, as Priya saying, and then being wrapped up as you being a discriminatory person. And I was just wondering to what extent you agree with how I've just framed that, and why you think in this moment, as during the pandemic, it's so important that unions work together on issues like these.
Well, you're absolutely right, Joe. During the pandemic, the government were completely preoccupied with taking on those who represented education workers and the families and children who use the service of education. That was their primary target, taking us on rather than engaging in any meaningful way. And what we see now is an increasingly authoritarian government that is wanting to clamp down on freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and of course as well, you know, in regards to trade unions, freedom of assembly. And in schools, it's not very different to what it is in colleges and universities, particularly in this current climate, at this time with catastrophe unfolding in the Middle East. There's a real desire from government to clamp down on that free expression and speech that children need to have access to. You know, schools and colleges and universities should be safe spaces for free and open debate. What we are seeing is a strengthening of the prevent agenda, and we know that will primarily target particular demographics. We've all seen Guardian articles recently of, you know, the requirement for an increased police presence in schools to monitor who will be attending demonstrations. And of course, yeah, they certainly have been consistently targeting the leaders of the trade unions that represent the education workers. My own social media has been quoted in meetings with the Department for Education. Now, it's one thing us being monitored, and I'm sure that's just comes with the job, but equally, anybody, any educator, any teacher who's critical of current education policy is, of course, partly well, it is fair game as far as this government is concerned. But I think there's a number of things that we can do as trade unions. We've got a real central role in creating common ground. I feel our ideas are popular and they are widely felt. So, you know, if we look at the culture war issues that the government keep pushing at the moment, only 2%, for example, think the debate around transgender people is one of the most important issues facing the country. The fact of the matter is, most people are not interested, and this Home Secretary in particular and this government are all about talking to their very narrow bases. You know, the public broadly support the idea of respect, and they value respect more than any other attribute in their leaders, and that is not something that we are. I don't think any decent person would attribute. I can't imagine anyone attributing the idea that they respect Suella Braverman. I think we have a central role in playing also in reminding voters that and our members actually that more equality and more equity is good for everybody. A more equal society benefits us all. And I think we have to be really considering our messaging in order to build that solidarity across difference. But I was in a meeting yesterday and I was talking about 55 years since Martin Luther King's mountaintop speech, and he talks about in that speech, if I lived in Russia or China or any totalitarian country, and he was talking about injunctions being put on peace marches, maybe he could have expected it because they hadn't committed themselves to things like free speech, free press, and freedom of assembly. Right now, I don't think anybody can deny that those three things are very much under attack. And I absolutely agree with Owen's contribution. There is the space, I think, for us to mount a united, broad campaign that defends freedom of speech, which is without doubt under attack at the moment. The idea that we live in a free press is highly questionable when we look at the idea that, you know, GB News or Talk TV are, you know, free, independent media. And then, of course, that in the context of the minimum service levels bills and restrictions on strike action that the government are looking to move forward with, the idea that they can you know, even moot banning legitimate demonstrations, it's without doubt that the freedom of assembly is also under attack. So I think we have to occupy that space as trade unions and demand better of our political leaders.
going to come back to you on the point you were making about a broad campaign, because that's actually a question I've got lined up for you. And yeah, I think there's a key theme running here of, them attempting to sort of use these culture war issues to pretend that they are protecting something and that we are the threat. Don't know if you've seen in the comments, Daniel, not the takeaway from this evening, but worth letting you know. Someone loves your glasses and they are serving. So, Priya, if I could come back to you for a moment. Our campaign, which is clear that everyone on this call who's participating and the hundreds that are watching, we've had over 600 people all the way through so far. The campaign exposed that we're going to be launching in full over the coming weeks, it doesn't just need to reach UCU members. This can't just be a trade union campaign that kind of, plays to its normal audience. We need to go beyond that. And I was thinking if, you have any thoughts on how we might do that. And a question before I bring Priya in, if you're watching and you have thoughts about how we do that, whack them in the comments. We want to get a real sense from everybody about how we kind of penetrate out. So Priya.
Yeah, first of all, I want to extend my solidarity to people who in many places are being targeted by their employers or schools, colleges for speaking out about the situation in the Middle East. So, I think we need to remind ourselves that people are paying quite a big price and not just being kind of disinvited from this or that event. And I also do want to extend my solidarity to people, our colleagues in Israel, Palestine, who are struggling and in very difficult situations. One thing I do want to say is that most ordinary people of whatever political persuasion do not like things that smack of totalitarianism. They don't like the idea that people can be fired for speaking their minds. They don't like the idea that government can tell you what to say or what not to say, or who should be invited, who's not to be invited. And I think that this is a very strong plank on which the union and the unions can campaign, which is to say government has no business interfering with people's lawful free speech and with people's right to, read, think, and write as they see fit. I slightly diverge from Owen in that I don't think that, minorities or people of color or women of color are voiceless. What we're actually seeing is a concerted campaign to suppress voices, because social media has given a degree of ability to talk about things that you can't get a space in mainstream media to talk about. And this is why they troll social media. What they don't like is that people might have platforms and that they are not, in fact, voiceless. The other thing, and this is the last thing I'll say about the campaign, we should not underestimate the enemy. The culture war is not just something that is happening spontaneously. It is funded. It has very strong parties behind it. It is part of a planned strategy to marginalize, to render voiceless, to shut people up in universities and beyond. And I think that we should take very good measure of what we're up against and understand that we need to fight together and in a very sustained manner.
I could not agree more with the final point that you just made. I think it is very insightful and I think it is very crucial. And I think if there is anybody watching this, either now or when we have it on repeat, that doesn't realize the magnitude and the depth and the coordination of this, now is the time. And I agree with you as well. I think it's really important for us all to really pay testament and respect to people who are speaking out and the consequences, and yet continuing to do so. I think one of the things that sort of made me really proud last week is when the news broke last Friday about the dossier on one of our members, was how many people rallied to say, that could be me, that is me, and I will continue being anti-racist, being anti all form of discrimination, being a proud trade union member who takes action, being someone who attends rallies and demos. And I don't want us to do like a I'm Spartacus moment, because this is really serious, but we do have a phrase in UCU, which is, you know, UCU and proud. And I think if there are people watching this now who want to show to each other that they are people who are going to stand up and speak, put it in the comments. But I just really want to echo what you said, Priya, because I think it's crucial. And I think for us, the challenge in this campaign is how we're going to sort of dismantle that bit by bit, and how we're going to get buy-in from not just the whole trade union movement, but from other groups, and to make sure that we aren't just people going it alone, and that, you know, there aren't just the same people kind of risking it all the time. Which does bring me, Daniel, to the point you kind of finished on in your last contribution, but I wanted to save and bring us back to. We're both on the TUC General Council. I believe this campaign and the issues that we're discussing tonight are obviously incredibly important to UCU members. And obviously this will be a campaign that we are going to run regardless. But I think we all agree it is much deeper than that. It is much broader than UCU members, and we need all unions on board. So I guess what I'm asking, but I think you kind of already said it, is, are you up for joining, you know, UCU in campaigning and really campaigning for, you know, the whole TUC to get behind this position?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what the state are doing is what the state has always done. So behind me there is Blair Peach, and when Blair Peach was murdered by the police after during a opposition rally to the National Front, there was a justice campaign established for him, and the police you know, had very keen interest, special branch involved in that, you know. Stephen Lawrence campaign, the same again. We've seen the whole spy cop stuff. We've seen a strengthening of prevent. We are seeing a clampdown on freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and then of course that freedom of assembly through the restrictions of strike action. I think there is scope for the TUC to take on all of those issues actually, and demand that all of us have the right to be heard and free from any repercussions from the state in any way. I mean, you would think that this is what this government would be championing. You know, as has already been mooted. You know, they often call themselves, you know, the free speech champions, but they absolutely aren't. What we've got at the moment is a government clinging on to power, and it will use every mechanism in its arsenal to do that. And of course, it is frightened of all of the stuff that is happening. There is, you know, it is frightened of any sort of mass movement for change in any regard. So we're going to have to really absolutely defend that space, and happy to work with other organisations, trade unions, and through the TUC to do that.
Brilliant. That was exactly the answer I wanted. So I'm going to come back to Priya and then back to you, Daniel. Have you got any final messages, any kind of final comments, thoughts, reflections that, you know, you just haven't maybe made yet, Priya?
Just to amplify something I began to say, which is that what we're witnessing in terms of a government claiming to be all about free speech, but then clamping down very hard on the right to protest and on actual free speech, is not an accident. It is part of an ideology which turns things upside down. And it's no accident that EDI is being kind of targeted, right? Because if you think about it, EDI is kind of fairly basic and bland: equality, inclusion, diversity. These are not in and of themselves threatening ideas. But what we now have is a pushback against anything that smacks precisely of equality, and that smacks of a different kind of order of society, where we don't have extreme concentration of wealth on one hand and everybody else in different at different levels of dispossession on the other. And I think that we do have to understand how deliberate this strategy is of undermining ideas and discourses which speak about equality and inclusion. The other thing to say, and we've seen this very, very clearly in the last few days, is the extent to which making basically demonizing discourses of inclusion and anti-racism are getting more and more salient. So we've had a bunch of editorials in different tabloids and media attacking decolonization as though everything that is currently happening, all the catastrophes that are unfolding, are a result somehow of academic decolonization. If only, right? I mean, if only academic decolonization had that kind of purchase. It doesn't. So I think we need to understand that this is deliberate, and our own strategies have also got to be considered and deliberate in order to take on this topsy-turvy ideology and put things back up again the way they should be, putting equality and inclusion at the center of what a workplace should be doing, and that this should be just a self-evident idea, and not this kind of dangerous extremism that the government is now making it out to be.
That is absolutely spot on. And I think, like you say, shining a light on the sort of the topsy-turvy nature of it. And, if the unions, and I'm sure Daniel will say this, like, we're so often blamed for this and that. It's like, if we had the power you are attributing to us, believe me, this country would be quite different to how it currently is. Daniel, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose sometimes it can feel pretty dark, and it's sometimes hard not to get pessimistic, but I really want to warn people against that, because I'm quite optimistic about the future, because I am just always amazed by our young people, really, but also the wider public. We have this huge ongoing catastrophe in Gaza, Israel, the Middle East at the moment, and 76% of the public want a ceasefire. They are compassionate people. The majority of the British public are anti-racist. I fundamentally believe that. The majority want people to live in dignity and want to live free lives. Working class people are decent. The majority of people absolutely oppose authoritarianism in terms of what we're seeing from this government. So let's have a bit of confidence moving forward that we are on the right side of history, and we can bring about the change that we desperately need to see in this society.
Preach. Completely endorse everything that you just said. Well, this is drawing to a close. So I want to say thank you to the two panelists that are still with us and to the one that is left. There has been the comments that have been coming up. You can see people have really enjoyed this session. Really insightful, brilliant comments made tonight. I think really stitching together and exposing what is happening in a really kind of digestible way, which is going to be crucial for this campaign, particularly when we kind of want to build a broad base of support. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in and added your own comments. I want to ensure all UCU members that the union is taking this very seriously. Our challenge now, as we've heard this evening, is to come together, and this campaign offers us opportunity to do just that. And when I say come together, I mean the entire union, because this is an issue that is impacting on everyone, whether you are prison ed, adult ed, FE or HE. And I also mean across the whole movement. And I am saying that this campaign starts here, and it will unfold. It will unfold into areas that I think we've not even touched upon tonight, as the weeks and the months passed. We've got minimum service levels. We have blacklisting, attacks in the media, targeting of ordinary trade unionists, targeting of children in schools and colleges, of students, of people going to protests. These things are not happening by chance. They are happening because a vicious right-wing government backed by murky, interest groups completely want to reverse progress that we have made and batter down the voice of working class people or other dissenting people and groups more broadly. It is coordinated, it is deliberate, and we as trade unionists have to be the first line pushing back against that. So we have to be prepared to run this campaign, not just in the face of these UKRI attacks against the EDI, or against, the clampdown on protests in response to what is happening in the Middle East. We have to be prepared to go the distance with this campaign up until the general election and beyond. We have a task ahead of us that is to expose the actions of this government and to expose them not just to each other, but to ordinary working people, and to such an extent that it leads to their removal from office. I am committed to that task. I know that everyone watching right now is committed to that task. The panelists are committed to that task. The next step is to see who else is. To our branches that have tuned in tonight, thank you so much for all the extraordinary work that you do and that you have been undertaking. Please look out for more information on this campaign. There's going to be a lot coming, particularly next week. To our members, thank you as ever for tuning in and backing the union. I've seen that we've had some retired members on here tonight as well. Obviously, there is a huge role for you to play as ever. We need to get ready to go again because, as I've said, we faced very similar attacks during the pandemic and we overcame them. Together, we're going to do so again, but we cannot, as has been said this evening, underestimate the scale and I think the depth of what we are up against. So good evening. Thank you so much for everyone for coming along. Thanks for tuning in and good night.